How many days until Christmas is it? It is Christmas, right? What year is it? Time has no sense of meaning for me anymore. Once I get my fourth kid, then I was just like, oh, I have no idea what day it is. Okay, but this is our first HITA talk in quite a while here at the Guam Museum. And we are very happy to be offering space to share the work of two amazing young Chamorro researchers who are doing very critical, very important work. But we're also very happy to all of you for helping us relaunch the HITA Talk series. The HITA Talk series is something that the Guam Museum started years ago when it first opened its doors as the local version of TED Talks. And so it was a chance to create a space because people were always saying, oh, did you see this TED Talk from so-and-so? And it's some random person in England who's telling you exactly how to raise your kids. Or it's some random person from Iceland who tells you exactly how to maximize your sleep. And it's always these random people from other corners of the world who are telling you the most amazing things that you can do, or the simple truths of the world. And then when the Guam Museum opened, it was like, hey, why don't we create a space, because we have a stage here, we have theater here, where the thinkers, the creatives, the movers and shakers, those in our region, we get to celebrate them and the work that they are doing. So that is sort of the spirit of the HITA Talk, and I want to thank all of you for helping restart this, because we haven't had a HITA Talk since 1940. I'm just kidding, it was like 2023 when we last had a HITA Talk, but as I said, I'm not good with time anymore. So, let's all give ourselves a round of applause for restarting the HITA Talk. Now, the topic that we're going to be covering today is very, very important. It is, of course, the issue of return, repatriation, rematriation. And so this is something which has always been an issue, but it is becoming a more significant issue, in part because communities are getting more things back, and because people who never imagined that you could get things back are starting to get things back. And that your average indigenous person around the world, through the power of social media, through the power of researchers like Sam and Andrew, who we're going to hear from today, who are doing the work out there, are able to bring the stories of collections that your average person in the Pacific might never get to see. And so this is why this issue of bringing home the bones of our ancestors, bringing home the treasures that our ancestors have made, is becoming even more and more powerful, is because for your average person, it was never even considered possible before to get these things back. But now we realize that they're out there, and more people feel the pull that they belong in our lands, they belong in our islands, they belong in our lives again. And so I'm gonna give the mic now to Sam and Andrew so they can introduce themselves and they can start their wonderful talk, Waves of Return.
Just, all right. Off the day, everybody. Good morning. So just asking again for introduction and for the opportunity to restart the HITA Talks. And again, Magov naman HITA winning. Sam and I have been based in Germany for perhaps almost 2 years now, and we've been based in Berlin, and we've been engaging collections in the Federal Museum Network in the capital of Germany, one of the largest economies, if not the largest economy in the European Union. And so with that, there was a whole cultural network, a museum network, an artistic network that we've just been getting our feet wet, so to speak. So without further ado, we can start the talk. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
So we'd like to start our conversation today with a recording from Manyaka Surumoloru, who has been fighting for over 50 years to find the head of his hereditary chief, Mangumeli, which was taken from what is today Tanzania. So we can go ahead and play that recording.
Free! Free us! Free us from the museums, from the basement, from the clinics, where they are keeping us in the shelves with skulls of monkeys, gorillas, and the other animals. Bring us back home and rest us in peace forever.
And so our talk today is a very much a sensitive topic, but very much needed for what we might call restorative justice. We're talking about the kidnapped dead, heritage withheld, and talking about bridging thousands of kilometers and over centuries of time of ancestors being away from home. And so Sam and I would like to further situate our experience with you all. When we went to see our ancestral remains, our ancestors, it was in a warehouse outside the outskirts of Berlin. And we went into a very narrow corridor-like room. Not all of them could be put out in display just because of the spacing. It was simply too much to put out in the room. We'd like to ground this talk with a prayer. We can go to the next one. Anana koniham halami gimen ima potlu itelan imananyata ufaisin maisenzo haftainamo na parabain na tungo imanyaina na gaigi dos pagunito gunin. Komatungo na gaigiham imananya kosiha na manawagam. Sumangan jo astina tinatu sa usen hasu na ma komatutuham mulasatu tori ilinatan tau to maopitan sa taiguini no. Zaman hang suatu baru na fangami na gahin ham na mangagi ham ju gini real quick. Plus, I'd like to invite you to say this prayer. I think most of us perhaps know this prayer. We're going to do it 3 times, and the blue is just a suggestion of when you can respond. Of course, we can just do the whole thing. We're going to do it 3 times, and I'll start it off. Hopefully, we can do this. Namaku ni tayo na ko binagumia asay na tanitamaman tayo na minala famina sa fanyaga di minala tayo na namaku ni tayo na ko binagumia asay na sa fanyaga di minala namaku ni tayo na ko binagumia asay na sa fanyaga di minala tayo na. So the next slide is how we experience engaging with ancestral remains, and so we're going to bring you to this space, and so you will see the skulls of our ancestors. If this is something that perhaps you might not want to see, you can step out or you can close your eyes, but we really like to bring you into the space that we encountered them. And we will just sit in that moment and just sort of take it in as we did, sort of question this and so many things like that. Next. Okay, we can move on to the next one. Tautau manuhau. Tautau manuhau. in our talks in the past few days. We met with the repository, we met with folks back home, and Sam and I have been really reflecting about our experiences, about bridging these museums and times from. And this is a very, very basic, elementary sort of question. If you were to translate this into English, one would say, where are you from? Where are you from? Kautomonomo. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. If we really want to reflect on this question, from whose people are you? Perhaps. Or from where are your people from? We can play around with this question, complicated. But the minute you invoke this question, where are you from, you are already invoking the people from who you are in relation with. And conversely, when you're asking about the people from who you relate with, you're asking where you're from. And so these two questions are really intimately intertwined at the very moment. And so as Sam and I are going about this project, we're really thinking about this question, Kautomonomo. What does that mean when our origin story is from Pontano? The way we go about in the world is literally made from us, made from our ancestors. Next slide.
So today we're going to be talking about how we found the stories of our ancestors in these European museums and how we're working to bring them home. I think I want to say first that Andrew and I are not experts in this work. We have no prior experience with museum studies or working in these kinds of spaces, but we really approach it from a sense of responsibility, of knowing that these are our people, and as much as we want them back, they also want to come home. So I think that's kind of the grounding from which we've approached this. So just to give a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today, there are over 40 CHamoru ancestral remains from across the Marianas that are currently held in Berlin Museum collections, along with numerous cultural belongings. And we'll also be discussing 9 CHamoru and Carolinian skulls that are held in Madrid's Anthropology Museum. And we'll discuss in greater depth kind of the work that we've done to begin initiating the repatriation process. We've worked very closely with the Guam and CNMI historic preservation offices to begin to start that process. And we can go to the next slide. So we want to start off here by showing you what the display case looks like. This is in the Humboldt Forum, so it's one of the largest museums in Berlin. You can see in this corner there's a number of Senaki, as well as a sketch here from Georg Fritz, who was the colonial administrator of the Mariana Islands during the German era, and he was also the man responsible for the majority of grave robbing and the looting that took place over this time period. Next slide. So you can see here the Marianas display is kind of placed awkwardly. It's literally in the corner of the Oceania permanent exhibit, kind of wedged between Nauru and some other island nations on the side. And when Andrew and I first encountered this was in February 2022. We walked into the Humboldt Forum and into the Oceania permanent exhibit to find this glass display case of our home islands. The definition of to corner is to be placed into a situation from which it is hard to escape. Nevertheless, protruding out of this corner was our ancestral spear, the serrated edges made by our ancestors, and we knew that it did not belong there. So you can see it in this photo here on the side. Next slide. Okay, so from Museum Island to the Mariana Islands. To provide more context, Berlin is kind of known for its museums. There's this whole strip of the city that extends out to the river that's known as Museum Island. And they currently have up to 200 museums and exhibition halls. Next slide. The Humboldt Forum, which houses the Oceanian collection and collections from the Marianas, is touted as this monument to arts and culture. It's sort of the German version of the famed British Museum. With this imposing facade, the museum is housed in a reconstructed royal palace and features the collections of 4 museum partners, including the Ethnological Museum, which is kind of where the Oceania collection is located. The Humboldt Farm's opening was largely overshadowed by protests from former colonies of the German Empire, as well as community members. You can see them gathered here in front of the Humboldt Farm when it was in construction, and they're calling here for the restitution of their ancestral remains that were in the possession of this museum. So the opening was overshadowed because of kind of the context of looted art that the museum was set to display, which is nearly 20,000 artifacts from across the former German colonies. This includes Africa, of course Oceania, and Asia as well. Next slide. So you can see here there were these calls to tear down the Humboldt Farm, to defund it as it was in construction. The Humboldt Farm had also planned to exhibit Benin bronzes, which are these valuable cultural artifacts from Nigeria that were looted by British soldiers in 1897. And through this kind of network of collecting, they were subsequently sold to the Ethnological Museum. But in 2022, there was some movement on this. Nigeria and Germany recently signed an agreement to begin repatriating the over 1,000 Benin bronzes that are in the museum's collections. And this was kind of touted as this landmark case of the single largest repatriation of cultural objects. Next slide.
So the idea, the cause for restitution is not something new. Contested cultural property is very much woven into the fabric of the establishment of these European museums. For example, we have the Brachiosaurus on the left, and then in the Natural History Museum since the 1980s. The government of Tanzania has been calling for the return of the dinosaur bones. And we have the Lonely Queen in the Noise Museum. The bust of Nefertiti, very much a symbol of Egyptian beauty. It's over 3,000 years old, and decades for movements for restitution have gone nowhere really. But as Sam said, in recent years, the Benin bronzes below is really a watershed moment of an agreement between former colonies to have a significant amount of restitution taking place. Next, please. Turning more to human ancestral remains from colonial contexts, the federal government of Germany has an office from colonial contexts, and so they recently did a countrywide survey in terms of which museums and institutions have human ancestral remains from colonial contexts. But already in this survey, it's kind of concerned because the very collection that we are engaging with are absent in this survey. And this is a museum in the capital of Germany, and so we're wondering why did this fall? Why is it not there? And so the collections that we're engaging with are in the Persian Cultural Heritage Foundation, which is under the City of Berlin Museum Network. And so part of navigating our calls for restitution is really knowing the networks, knowing what is federal, what is a state museum, and where authority lies, and from whom do you write this letter to. Next. Aside from government and academic circles discussing calls for restitution, this conversation has very much been widespread in mainstream public discourse. For example, this podcast is from where the audio you heard in the beginning, Dig Where You Stand, sort of talks about how the museum network in Berlin is very much made possible and is a graveyard of ancestral remains behind these cultural artifacts, behind these exhibitions that made it possible. The person in black and white is how perhaps Manginelli and our ancestors are connected, because he was the main scientist in the early 20th centuries that requested from German administrators from all of the colonies to bring skulls, to bring remains to Berlin, so we can do this expansive study that sort of characterizes racial superiority, which is no longer recognized, of course. His name is Felix von Huschen. Next. But amid a lot of these controversies, there have been positive headway. For example, in the university that I'm going to school at, in Göttingen, there have been really successful projects and restitutions. For example, on the left, we have Moriori and Maori delegations leading the repatriation ceremony. We have the Republic of Palau, close to home. Also, they went to Göttingen to restitute their ancestors, and representatives from Tanzania, and we also see Tanisi Bunigilo. I think she was here a couple of weeks ago for the Dialogue Conference, and so she's really a sustained mover and shaker in this matter. Next.
Okay, so turning back to our context, this is Georg Fritz, who was the administrator of the NMI. He spent 7 years in Saipan as the district officer. So in this case, it's really clear how colonization provided both the structure and the logic that enabled him to take all of these ancestral remains. During his time in the Marianas, he took more than just our ancestors. He was also collecting soil, animal specimens, a number of cultural belongings. So it's really, he was able to take a lot in this relatively brief span of time. Next slide. And just a bit of context about the German colonial era in the Marianas. Following the Spanish-American War, Spain sold all of its Micronesian territories, of course with the exception of Guam, to Germany in 1899. So we can see here some photos from that time period, as well as a photo of Fritz and Saipan. Next slide. So in this next part, we're going to be discussing a bit in detail from Fritz's note-taking about where our ancestral remains were taken from. They're tied to specific island locales. So if we are able to repatriate them, we can kind of begin to have a conversation too about returning them specifically to the places that they were taken from. During this period, Fritz collected and sent ancestral remains to Berlin over the course of several years in 4 batches. Next slide. He joined the colonial service in 1899. And there was sort of a wide network of collectors at this point. So Fritz sent the first batch of ancestral remains to Berlin via a German geologist who was traveling through Germany's Micronesian colonies at this period, and his name was Georg Wegener. And they kind of had some writing back and forth to each other through letters, as well as notes that provides more information on this point. So this first batch consisted of 2 skulls and 11 jawbones, and Wegener's correspondence to museum officials about this collection lets us know where they were taken from. So I'll just read this quote, if we can go to the next slide. So Wegener writes, before my arrival on the northern tip of the island of Saipan, behind Sinopag, here a steep coral rock rises up, in the middle of which a cave opens, a cave of 15 to 20 meters. Here quite a number of skulls, estimated 15, laid in the open, detached from the bodies. These were buried in a sitting position. Another cave with bones was also found. Here burnt lime is poured over them. In the same cave, a lot of coconut juice was found. In Fritz's opinion, the skulls can only be Chamorro. The second bundle was sent to Berlin in 2 individual batches, which included 24 ancestral remains, consisting of 22 skulls or skull fragments, 2 jawbones, 3 leg bones. Fritz's notes state that one of the skulls was taken from the northern island of Surigan, but it broke into fragments on the journey. And he wrote, perhaps the debris could still be of value, and I therefore take the liberty of sending it to you as a parcel. Since our ancestors arrived in Berlin, there's been quite a turbulent history. In 1928, they were kind of brought under the command of a Nazi eugenicist, and we don't have detailed history about what happened at this period, but we do know that at one point a swastika was etched onto one of our ancestors' skulls. So they've really encountered so much violence since being in these museum collections. During World War II, a lot of these collections were bombed or separated and transported to different parts of the country to kind of avoid what was going on with the war. We think that the Marianas collection was also probably moved around at several points, although today they are all back in Berlin where we were able to access them. Next slide.
Next.
Move that.
Forward. Forward.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. I mean, Sam already read this, but this is a Calvary cave in the northern part of Saipan, and you can sort of get a sense of the provenance research that we've been doing and connecting the places, going there, and also connecting with the historical account. In Calavera means skull in Spanish. Okay, next. Okay, we can go to the next one, sorry. So the status of repatriation is a very complicated process that really no one told us how to do it. We just have to. We go to the previous one. So we've been working with the CNMI HBO, which is under the Department of Culture and Community Affairs. We worked with them to do a report and to have the DCA director write the letter, and it's also CC'd with the governor and the lieutenant governor. They are aware of this movement. We can go to the next one. I'll just read part of the letter from Director Frank Rebalman. The return of our ancestral remains and cultural objects is a vital step toward reclaiming our cultural pride and identity. These items, which carry deep historical and cultural significance, are at the heart of our heritage, and the repatriation will greatly enrich our community. This process is not only about correcting the injustices of the past, but also fostering healing for both our ancestors and future generations. These cultural treasures rightfully belong to the people of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Although they were taken during colonial times and sometimes under laws that existed then, those laws no longer reflect the values and protections established by current historic preservation regulations. We can go to the next slide.
Okay, so moving on to another case, to take advantage of our time in Europe, we've really been trying to find where else our ancestors are located in these museums. So we were able to conduct a research visit to the National Museum of Anthropology in Madrid. And this museum holds 9 CHamoru and Carolinian skulls. Although the way that they ended up here and the possible pathways towards bringing them back home is a bit more complicated than the German case. Next slide. So you see here, this is kind of what the inventory of the ancestral remains looks like from the museum end. They're organized by region, so coming from Micronesia, and they range from Rota to Guam. Calavera Cave is again mentioned in Saipan. But what you'll notice here that kind of stands out is under this column, they're marked as a donation. Next slide. So these remains have more of a kind of a turbulent history. They were brought to Madrid in 1887 as part of this exhibit that was intended to display, kind of put on display cultures and people from Spain's colonies in the Philippines and in Guam as well. So during this time, the Spanish government was sort of inviting various people to donate clothing, parts of their everyday lives, parts of their material culture to be on display. And people from Spain's colonies were also a part of the exhibit. They were kind of paraded around in colonial dress at the time, and it was sort of a moment for Spain's government to see what people in their colonies looked like. And kind of as part of this process, Mariano Fausto was a Chamorlinian kind of elite figure within the Spanish government. He served as the deputy mayor of what is today Tamuning. He participated in this exhibit, and he gathered these 9 skulls from across the archipelago. So they had skulls on display as part of the exhibit. But kind of a haunting fact about this story, Fausto did travel to Madrid because, as we mentioned, he was kind of part of the local elite with the Spanish government. He actually became ill and died while he was in Madrid. And today, his skull is kept in the museum archives, along with the skulls of all of the ancestors that he brought there. So he eventually became part of the collection that he created. Next slide. So you have a photo here of people who were on display in this exhibit. Next slide. And here are some photos of Andrew and I kind of working with some of the objects that were brought to Madrid and that were marked as donations as part of this kind of exhibition process. Next slide. And as we mentioned here, so Andrew kind of went over some previous cases with Germany and with other Pacific nations where they were able to carry out these successful repatriations in recent years. In Spain, the landscape is a bit more complicated. We were told that no restitutions have ever taken place, and in particular, this Museum of Anthropology hasn't ever returned ancestral remains or cultural objects, so there's no precedent for these returns. And it was also explained to us in Spanish law, in legal terms, our ancestors belong to the Ministry of Culture and not the museum. So whereas in the German case, it's kind of up to the museum as an institution to make the decisions about whether or not they get to come home with us. In Spain's case, it's something that's decided by politicians. But we were told kind of from allies within the museum that I guess it's kind of like a liberal moment for Spain's government, so it would be like an opportune time for us to make this kind of claim, and there's higher chances of it being received well than if another government or political party was in power. While we were there, we were able to visit our ancestors and pray over them, and we requested that they all be kept together because previously they were being stored separately. Next slide.
Turning back to Germany, because Sam's Fellowship of the Humboldt Forum has concluded, we decided to engage the Museum for Naturkunde, or the Natural History Museum, particularly with the Center for Humanities of Nature. And so just a little bit about this idea of the Centers of Humanity of Nature. It's sort of a novel idea, an organization to be embedded within a natural history museum, which is oftentimes more focused on taxonomical, more biological sort of focuses on how to categorize and how to label their specimens and collections, which is also oftentimes named after the collector who took them, or yeah. And so
yeah, you can see here there's a bird from Pagan.
There's a bird from Pagan by Ataka Tsukasa Nobusuke in 1931 in the German museum, and so there's multiple collectors that precede and predate during and after the German colonial period, and so part of the project is also putting the pieces together in terms of how collectors came to the Marianas and did their collecting, and what networks were there at the time, and really blowing up this web of collecting and seeing what can we get out of understanding these networks. Yeah, you go to the next one.
Yeah, so we know, we haven't located, but we've found from these archives, this museum is supposed to hold over 400 butterflies, as well as a really large collection of birds. And I think something we wanted to mention is like, yeah, it's just really meaningful for us, like growing up on Guam and not ever like seeing or hearing our native birds, and then encountering their bodies in these museums, and thinking about as well, like we can't think about these conversations of bringing our ancestors back home without also acknowledging the way their graves and burial grounds are being disturbed actively today through U.S. military construction projects. So we really do see all of these projects of protecting our ancestors and protecting their homelands as connected and as part of the same movement. And I think something I forgot to mention on the Spanish side was because those ancestors were taken from across the archipelago, it also requires kind of a more creative approach. This collecting, of course, predates the political separations that exist today in the Marianas. And so during the Piala conference a couple weeks ago, when the CNMI HPO was here, we were able to conduct a joint meeting between them and the Guam Historic Preservation Office to talk about what it would look like to kind of mount a repatriation claim that's coming from both HPOs together. So I think addressing this kind of colonial violence in the past also requires us to kind of work beyond the constraints that are in place today to work together as one people and as one archipelago to bring them home. So we're going to continue on with that work. I know we said that Spain has never done it before, but there was also a time when Germany had never given anything back. So we're going to kind of continue down that avenue and continue looking for where are other specimens and hopefully finding the rest of the birds and the rest of the butterflies somewhere in the bowels of this Berlin museum. Next slide.
So, to be quite frank, it's very challenging to post a claim and to really envision all of our cultural belongings coming back to the Marianas, right? But we are asking that question nevertheless. And what comes out of that question is very important to gaining access, academic access, historical access to texts, to archives that have otherwise been made not available to people back home. And so this is also part of returning, of repatriating knowledge that we very much need to insert our perspectives in. And so oftentimes, you know, we have scholars and we have scientists who have the privilege of going into these museums and just opening it up and researching it haphazardly and writing, you know, a really nice thesis academic paper, which is very nice, but you know, like, you know, you need to offer that to the people from which it came from. And so this is part of that conversation. And with that in mind, we have a QR code here. This is one of the questions that please, por favor, and take a camera of it. And how do you, this is one of the questions, how do you imagine welcoming our ancestors back home? We really, really, really appreciate your feedback because it is very, very important that we share this work with you all. And so you can take the time now to do it perhaps. We also, for those of you who do not have a smartphone, we have paper and pen. Por favor, your email, your contact, we want to.
Utilizamos esse QR code. If you prefer to do it old school.
Yes. You guys can do that right now, and I think when you guys are doing that, or you can do it at a later time, but you can also do it now. No, wait. I think this concludes our presentation, and if you have any questions or comments, we really appreciate continuing this conversation. Si Diyos, si.
Any questions? Okay. Anyone have any questions for our?
Buenas. And Sijus Masi for a wonderful effort, presentation, and then, as you were saying, it's just something that's so important to do and something that must be done. I just wanted to share, and I can share the resource with you later, but I used to teach about this a little bit. So Spain has returned at least one ancestor of that they refer to as a Bushman. I don't know that that's an appropriate way to refer to him anymore. But it does say that the body had been on display. That was probably what I was talking about. It's like they actually taxidermic style displayed this Bushman. And they got together with the government. So the government and the Museum of, I should have put on my reading glasses, where are they? But the government was involved, a museum was involved, and they signed an agreement, and they did return his body to be reinterred. So I just wanted to let you know that, and that might be something that can be helpful to your case.
Jesus Masi.
Yes, thank you. That's very new news to us. That might not have been the same museum. We're still sort of navigating the level of autonomy between museums and governments, and it's very much a pace we were keeping up with, especially with our colleagues in the Museum of Anthropology. But if there is definitely a precedent, it's very good to know, so we could possibly include that in the report, and so cite that as well as we write the letter to the Culture Ministry. So thanks, Kelly, for that.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Or and somebody on the live stream said, Andrew looking good.
Good day, Andrew and Sam. Thank you so much for your presentation. This is just like a background question. So I know in the US there's NAGPRA, or the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Does anything like that exist in Spain or in Germany? And that's my basic question.
Yeah, NAGPRA, yeah, we tried to go down that road, but it closed up pretty quickly. Especially the international context, there is, as I said earlier, there's an Office of Collection from Colonial Context, which is, it falls under the purview of the Foreign Ministry in Germany, which is developing some sort of master scheme to address the massive issue of collections from colonial context, which has yet to be approved by the German Bundestag or the federal government yet. So that's sort of the situation right now, and but we're not waiting. You cannot wait for them. So we're just gonna keep on pushing. In terms of the side of Spain. Yeah, it's still something that we are waiting to engage with once we get a joint letter put together by both HPOs. And it has to be done in Spanish too, so we have to, ask them, can you translate this? Spanish, yeah. But that's a good question.
Anyone else have any questions or any comments or anything to, one of the important things I think from that is, if anyone has, as we've seen, if you have any experiences too, because a lot of this is very new territory. And so, and it deals with different nations involved and different precedents, and so, CHamorus have had some experiences with repatriations before, but not a lot compared to some other indigenous groups that have had decades-long fights to get back artifacts and ancestral remains. And so, learning from seeing what other communities have been able to accomplish and how they've done it, and seeing what mechanisms are out there are key. Anyone else? Did anyone else think that the Tampamona got that guy? Did anyone? I thought the Tampamona got that guy.
Si Fausto.
Yeah, si Fausto. I was like, the first time when Sam and Andrew first told me that, I was like, I mean, opinions. That guy's got it. Oh, let's see.
I have a question. I guess it's more of a personal one for you guys, but as you guys were explaining your process of going into these museums, and I guess it was it mind boggled me that to think about how these are our ancestors and their remains are in these other countries' museums, but we are in the process, or you guys are in the process of almost asking permission to see and to be with our own ancestors. Can you guys, I guess just talk a little bit, how does that feel? What does that look like for you guys? Does it mind boggle you too to have to be like, hey, can I see my ancestors? Yeah.
Yeah, Thank you for that question. I think there are ways that, because the system, it feels so like dehumanizing to be in that room, and the museum itself is made to feel like this very like sterile environment, from the lighting to the ways that we have to approach them. Like we have to wear lab coats and gloves if we're going to touch any of the objects, because at one point the museums were treating them with all kinds of chemicals, and they don't know how safe it is to interact. So there are all these kinds of barriers. Something that inspired me at the Piala conference, Lenny Leon, who is now the NMI museum director, he talked about like there's like museum protocols around not being able to touch things, but we should still be able to touch it if it's ours and if it was made by our ancestors. So for Andrew and I, like the first thing we do when we get in there is we always pray over them. We ask the other museum staff to leave the room. We bend down to be eye level with them. Sometimes we'll try and touch the top of their heads after we pray, because I think it's important for them to know and to be able to feel that we're there as well. And I think something that is sustaining is hearing from other indigenous peoples who have been involved in these like decade-long struggles, working with these museums and asserting their voices and insisting that we should be able to have access and we should be able to bring them home. We spoke with another Hawaiian repatriation advocate who was like, said it's so important to remember, like, as much as we want them back, they also want to come back. So to be able to feel that, and to be able to just be with them in the time that we have, and thinking about like how long it's been since they were here, since they heard our language, or since they felt any of us, and how in their time, like the kind of reverence that even like the souls of our ancestors, we know the way that ancient CHamorus treated them. Versus to be like kept in the dark and kept in these boxes and treated with chemicals and having swastikas carved into them. I think like there's no way for us to reckon with all of that, but the best that we can do is like let them know that we're there.
It is very dehumanizing because on the one hand, Germany has, for example, one could say it's been proactive in restituting ancestral remains. But we have to really read in between the way they go through their process. It's you know like it's something that should be a straightforward sort of decision that should be initiated right away. You know, like it's really like a process. Like, oh, you want your ancestors back? Here, read our guidelines. 100 pages worth of guidelines, and here's what we wrote about the ethical protocol of how we should treat them. Mind you that these, or maybe perhaps now that they're more inclusive of scholars from the societies of origin, but it's still a very taxing process. I wanted to say something about I lost it. But as Sam was saying, it's been really inspiring to listening to the stories of other communities who are calling for the return of their ancestors. It's been very much a process of listening and a process of really gaining the gumption to ask this question. You know, our heritage matters as well as what you did in Namibia, as what you did in Nigeria, as what you did in other parts of the world. So we're finding networks to lift each other up in this process.
I was just wondering, have you guys had much partnering or collaboration with not just our cultural affairs government agencies here on Guam or in CNMI and across Micronesia? You know, the Pacific Islands Association of Libraries just recently had their 33rd annual conference, and a big thing, according to Linda Napati, president of that organization, was mentioning that, you know, collaboration among our museums and our National Archives is really a big key point that she wanted to bring across in that conference that was held. And I was just wondering, are there these types of partnering or collaborations that you guys have maybe sought out or experienced to to really try to get more focus on a lot of the work that you're doing? Anything you have on that?
Yes, I was able to attend a bit of the conference, and yeah, I think that was a good venue for us to have that initial joint meeting with Guam and CNMI and HPOs. But as for like building outside of that, I think we haven't. Like we've been looking laterally, and it would be good for us to also, yeah, look around in other directions because there's like the formal process of making a repatriation claim, but like as we kind of saw in the other instances, like with Nigeria or with just like protesting outside the museum, having these kind of like movements for solidarity across institutions and across communities is also really effective. So I think that's something that we can look into in the future, is kind of continuing to build with other like Pacific Islanders who are kind of engaging in these struggles and other groups internationally. Yeah, thank you for that. I think this is still work that's been very new, so we haven't built in that direction, but yeah, that's definitely something we want to look into.
And we have some questions on the live stream too, so real quickly, so are there in the collections in Europe some examples, of textiles that we no longer have in the Marianas, but are in the Freycinet drawings, for example? Somebody's asking about that.
Oh. One of the ones that I don't know if this is like a textile, but there was like a pair of woven slippers. Okay, yeah, I guess the one story I have about the slippers is we showed them to James Bamba, the weaver, and he was like, whoa, I've never seen this pattern before. So I think there's just so much potential in like connecting people with like textiles and with weaving, because it's like such an embodied practice, and he was like, just from looking at it, we could already tell it's like opening up to, like for him thinking about new ways of weaving and new patterns that could be kind of like reactivated and like woken up again. So yeah, I think there's just so much power in being able to bring these collections back to our communities or bring our people into them.
Well, first of all, Gumataotao for this like beautiful work that you all are doing. I can imagine that it would be so hard for so many reasons, but one of them being you're so far from home. And in using that time that you're away from home to be of service to home, is such a beautiful thing. So thank you both. I'm thinking about the correlation that you made, Sam, in the talk between the U.S. military's active destruction of our homelands here and the stories that they tell us about how necessary it is for our protection. And I know just a little bit about the research that you're doing as part of your PhD to kind of unpack the language that they're using. And I'm thinking about how part of the function of militarism is to disconnect us from our bodies, as well as disconnect us from our lands. And I'm thinking about your research, Andrew, about sound knowledge and these like other ways of knowing that oppression tries to take away from us as well. And so, in reflecting on that, I'm kind of wondering like what it was like for both of you inside of yourselves, inside of your bodies, being there with our ancestral remains, being with the birds. Like, what were the messages that you were hearing in your intuition? Like, how did your skin feel? Like, what was it like to be in conversation with them? Yeah. What did you hear?
Oh, wow. Thanks for that question. Yeah, it's very test. You know, I think it's very hard to put into words because all of what we were feeling is a combination of shock and a combination of excitement and a combination of so many possibilities and lost possibilities. For example, there's a Tuquanquan in the bird collection that is from Guam, and we all know that that particular bird is extinct. And so I've never seen it in the wild, but I've seen it in this sort of vastness of these bird collections. And you walk in there, and it's you walk into 1909, really, all the cabinets are of that era. The ornamentation as you walk into the museum, all these, you're passing through so many histories, and then you're in a section which you're sort of thrusted into with vultures, with huge eagles on one hand, and then you have a curator like going off and bringing the birds to you, bringing the bird skins to you. So it's I want to get to that point where we can do it ourselves. You know, we can go out, we can go in there, and we can engage it on our own terms, and that's only the bird skin collection. Yeah, it's just it really puts things into perspective of how much is gone, unfortunately. What the possibility lays for us now to engage with is there, and working through that vulnerability is very important to acknowledge. You know, that sort of sadness that of an ecological life that you never had the chance to experience in Guam, in the villages, in these particular places from where they came from, is something you just have to sit with and really sort of nudge these curators, because this is a Chihuahua, this is not a nefer, whatever you said it is. And you should write it on the tag. You should, I don't want this.
Put the real name.
There's some really basic things that could really like change a lot of things. Yeah. You want to add on?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think for me, like, the way that I grieve being there is like to be able to write about it. So it was kind of the way it was timed. Like the first time we visited those ancestral remains in Berlin was like right before FestPac. So I did a zine with my very dear friends, CHamoru and Carolinian, and I was able to kind of write about that experience, and then like to be able to read it in rooms with our people felt like a kind of homecoming too. I think for like writing for me is the way that I do reclamation. Yeah, so I think for us to be able to like bring things back into our own terms and say like, I can't take you with you, but I'm still like carrying you, and it's coming out of these spaces, and I can make sure that, yeah, it's just like we just have to keep telling these stories to our own people. I think we had a question, and then to Rita.
But I'm going to those know, rather than devaluing the things that you've done, which is a tremendous work, right? How do you imagine welcoming our ancestors back home? I imagine welcoming my ancestors back home with the stories that they have inside of them. In one of your presentations, you talked about skulls being found in caves in Saipan and was written by a colonizer. But I want to know what caused them to sit there. Was that a way of life during that time of year? I don't want to hear what the colonizers observed. I want to know what the reason why they were sitting here in that cave. That's what I would like to see welcome back, is their stories, not just their physical artifacts, the stories. That will really help us researchers and artists and creators in reestablishing and recreating our fragmented history.
Again, Uncle Frank, I think that's sort of what we've been presenting, sort of a testament to the sort of how we are, on the one hand, engaging this dynamic, and so we want to develop these methodologies and these stories of place as to why, for example, they were in a sitting position, there was lime, there was coconut juice. You know, these are information that we should be able to respond to. And, you know, for the way it's set up right now, it's always you have to engage what this colonizer wrote first, and then then you can do what you want to do after. You can, you can make your community engagement. That's really the unfortunate dynamic that's at play. And so, and we've had experiences with that, coming up with a methodology that really puts our community in the beginning, but it doesn't fall under the mandate of certain funding guidelines on the German funding scheme. So we've had to do both, and I think unfortunately, we're gonna always have to do both until perhaps they're back home and where we can really have autonomy over our stories.
Lovely. So I participated in FESPAC, and we were fortunate enough to be able to meet and experience the museum's care of our people and the artifacts, And so the performing arts section is a very big section, and there was quite a lot of different kind of logistical stuff in order to bring us into that arena. And then fast forward, the delegation got together with people in Hawaii and some of the delegates, some of the our people from the states who came to FESPAC in Hawaii. And the experience that happened was a very emotional experience, because I saw young people being very, very emotionally disturbed because of how our ancestors and what is rightfully the Chamorro people was displayed. So there was a lot of damage control and a lot of education and a lot of care that we had to do within that small time frame. And so I respect your work, I appreciate it, and I think it's necessary that things like this happen so that, people, our young iman hobens yan, timalili megay I jota sa gonabay na mapod man halong I tanong, no, territorial intimacy. Law, ye ezo na inetnon, no, hamini man mas uncle, then manay na siya, in nai animo, sa in nai supporti, sa ejohan na tempo na ora na matungo ginin mano siya. It was in that very small gathering that there was a bridge between the past and the present. And so there were a lot of care that had to be involved in bringing that emotional, how do I say it, care, so that we don't destroy the spirit. And when we gather in these kind of environments, that things can move forward. And so the Festival of the Pacific Arts, it was very ironic because it happened in a building. But in a very ironic way, the Pacific Islanders and indigeneity and transference of knowledge was contained, was very strong amongst us. And so my takeaway at that gathering at the museum was that we had an opportunity to bring those who are the future, to see things of the past. I didn't look at it as a sad time. I looked at it as almost a renewness and something that we can share in that very confined and special place. So, these kind of environments are very important, and you know, I think the government needs to be a little bit more aware, more supportive in putting Guam is in its place where, how do you market Guam? What makes us special amongst the other Pacific, amongst the other cultures? So, you know, it's a lot of balancing that are happening, and I congratulate you, and I thank you for asking me to speak to me.
Good evening, Sam, and Andrew for this really fulfilling presentation. And I just wanted to share a few things that I reflected on as you presented today, and maybe it's helpful just to hear it again. A few things that stood out for me was really the effort for cultural healing that is very important, I think, for all of us, but all of us also inclusive of, you know, those of us who are not indigenous here, but also have been born and raised in this community of island people and who hold the values very closely. And it made me think of how in strength and in numbers and in togetherness, that's really important for us as we build out Oceania and a stronger Pacific. And that how you advocate for the ancestors to be kept together is very critical, and it's so hopeful and enlightening, and I think that's something that we can always hold close. And how protections are connected, and so I really appreciated how you show how what you're seeing, you know, of the colonial past is still how we experience today in a very real and sometimes detached way here, but that experience is still connected, and so therefore our protections and how we build those need to continue to be protected. I think it's really awesome and amazing how you're bringing CNMI and Guam HPOs together. I know that it's not new, but it's also new ways of doing it. And so I think the way that you're doing it with the historic preservation offices are really important to how we establish historic and cultural preservation here. So if there's anything we can do to support that and continue that, you know, please reach out. And I think my question is, what kinds of levels of support do you feel are needed for this work, right? I mean, I think there's policy, but I think there's also structural and physical support that's needed to do this work. But I encourage you to also just continue to articulate it and hone in on the creative powers that both of you each have in this work, and to articulate those so that we can hear them across multiple levels, right? In each and every one of our fields of expertise, that we can hear that call and that need and that call for support. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to thank you too, as like you're someone I see as a mentor. So Nick was my boss when I was interning at Speaker Terlahi's office, and this was when some of like the military construction was first being proposed. And I remember sitting down with you and like looking at all of those maps. And I think that was such like a kind of a turning point for me, because I remember the two of you really we had to put the maps together against how we understand our ancestral villages versus how the military was mapping it. So I think that was kind of my first moment of learning how to read beyond those mappings, and I think that's really something that has been so critical to me in doing this work as well, and in thinking about bringing these HPOs together. And we always have to have that double lens of being able to analyze what the military or what the museum is saying on a cultural lens and from like knowledge that has been passed down. So thank you for that. But yeah, I think in terms of support, a big challenge is just funding. It seems like the responsibility should lie with Germany and Spain to fund the actual return of bringing them home, but that's not the case. And so in a lot of these cases of like prior repatriation, it was just like putting together a bunch of different like sponsorships, like can we get like Matson or an airline to sponsor like the actual travel or transportation? How do we fund like bringing them home in a way that's respectful? So I think that's kind of the challenge that Andrew and I are looking at now, is sort of piecing together. We're beginning to work with Guam Preservation Trust as a possible avenue for that, but there's just so many like on the material side, is like how do we actually make this happen if the museum is not going to pay for it?
All things considered, it's an enormous task. 2 nations, 2 now entities, and so I think we just also have to acknowledge that we have to just create a healthy means of endurance, and so I think part of this project is to acknowledge that, and so while there's this level of urgency, I think we need to just let things form. Of course, we're going to try our best to guide it, but yeah, it will take a bit of time and effort, which we are here for.
One more? Sabi ko sa telephone ko live stream. I have no idea what time it is right now. My phone isn't used to live stream.
No, I just wanted to also commend the both of you for heeding the call. You answered the call, and then for that heart-centered approach that you heeded the call. And it's such a great responsibility. It really is, but there's a reason why it happened, and to both of you. And in your process and in your journey, I'd like to pose a question in terms of how do you imagine successfully bringing them back here? And how do you see that? What thoughts of what perspectives do you have of successfully bringing them home, and then what will they do? How do you see it unfolding?
So I've witnessed 3 repatriation ceremonies from Pacific communities in Göttingen, in Germany, and so there are very different ways of going about it, and so one fundamental thing is that I think we really need a presence over there, and we need to tell them our story to them rather than them sort of self-gratizing themselves that we are sorry, we are apologizing, We need to say our story and make it heard, make it strong, and bring our voices, our songs, and our ceremony there, so they know that we, our community, values our ancestors, and I think that could be a sort of a guiding post in terms of this expansive logistical thing that will certainly form. And this will involve Auntie Zita, Uncle Frank. It was very beautiful in the Bishop Museum, and so certainly, especially how this is organized, that we want to draw from things that have been done already, and bring those voices in over there, and that's one thing I can definitely say about that when it comes.
Yeah, I think just being able to witness or like be a part of like the Latte ceremony at FestPac, that felt like such a powerful example of like what does it look like when we are reunited with them, when we're able to sing and pray with them. And like we were talking about here, like just seeing the way that like our young people too react when they're in those spaces and how it's just like an immediate like emotional like instinctive reaction to being reunited. I think like we need to lead from, as you were saying, from that place, like remembering and being able to root down in that and the struggles of like so many who've come before us to be able to bring them back home. And I think because we know exactly where so many of these ancestors were taken from, like down to the specific cave sites and locations, I think it would be really powerful to be able to return them there and to reinter them, because, yeah, I think we can feel that longing that they have to be able to go home.
We have questions that are on the live stream, but I'll just sum up some of the comments that they have, and because it's appropriate. There's some comments from people from the CNMI who want to point out that there's a repository in Guam, there's a modern museum in Guam, but they feel that the government there hasn't supported the needs of sort of the ancestors there in terms of making sure that there's facilities to take care of ancestral remains and collections there. And so there was some calls on the live stream that the CNMI government needs to do more to make sure that the ancestors are properly taken care of, whether they are found in the islands or whether they are brought home from Europe or anywhere else. And there was also a call for UOG, for the government of Guam, to reinstitute scholarships for, conservators, archivists, curators, because we definitely need more people like that here in the Marianas. And so I want to give the two of you a chance to kind of sum up before we close, for the final thoughts.
We want them back. I think we really want them back, and I guess and it takes your help, it takes your ideas, and it takes your feedback to formulate the best path forward. And we hope to continue this conversation as we move and keep going. CHamorus for everyone, and thank you for being here.